benefit fraud, but corporate tax avoidance costs us far more every year. Your local drug dealer or sex worker probably worry about getting their doors kicked in and getting dragged away by the police. But how many of the people responsible for the 2008 financial crash ever saw the inside of a jail? And where banks were forced to pay settlements and fines, a lot of that money came from shareholders and was tax deductible. In my country, the police can stop and search you under certain circumstances, but you're much more likely to get stopped and searched if you're a black or minority ethnic person, and less than half of all stop and searches actually end in anyone being arrested. So, for a system that is supposed to prevent crime and reform criminals fairly and justly, the penal system sure has a funny way of going about it. And yet, whenever anyone points this out, the supposed answer is always more police, more prisons, more of the same. Foucault says that's because the penal system isn't supposed to prevent crime, or reform criminals, or even dole out justice. It exists to defend the power of the ruling class. Pause, step away from the comments section. Before I give you the details and before you leave a comment, you need to understand what this means. When Foucault says the penal system exists to defend the power of the ruling class, he is not saying that there's some shadowy conspiracy of bankers and politicians planning to use the penal system to take over the world, right? Saying the penal system exists to defend the power of the ruling class is like saying the human eye is designed for taking in light. The human eye was not designed, it evolved. But saying designed to take in light gets across the idea that it's very good at that job, and pressure to do that job was instrumental in its development. It's perfectly possible that many of the people in the penal system, lawyers, judges, police officers, really want to prevent crime and really want to do good and are lovely people. That is completely consistent with what Foucault is saying. You can be a police officer and read Foucault. Please do. What he's asking, though, is, when the penal system fails to achieve its stated goals, who benefits from that failure? It's also worth revisiting what philosophers and academics mean when they talk about class. Classes are ways of talking about groups of people who are in similar situations or have similar experiences, especially in terms of their access to money and power. If you're in the same class as someone else, it does not mean that your experiences are identical. It's a little bit like when we talk about the weather. We know that not every air molecule in a weather front has the same temperature, speed, and direction. Those molecules act as individuals. But we can model trends in groups of them and ask what we can learn by looking at those trends. Especially when we're talking about the penal system and who gets arrested and who gets stopped and searched, never forget that things like race, gender, and ability can massively impact which class you fall into. Okay. Now we're ready to continue. Foucault thinks that the function of the penal system is to recycle waste product into something useful, or at least profitable. That waste product is criminals, but only criminals of certain kinds, the ones not useful to the ruling classes. That's why a lot of the injustices that we mentioned earlier tend to get treated a bit more leniently. If you're a job creator, you are very useful to the ruling classes, especially when power is explicitly capitalist, as it is in the West. Because the law is set by the ruling classes, they are very well represented in the administrators of the law. The politicians, the judges, the lawyers, the criminologists. These people are often white, often wealthy, often highly educated. Not always, just often. Remember weather fronts. Whereas the working classes, those surplus to power's requirements, are more often found among those on the receiving end of penal justice. If you ever get the chance, as I have, just go and sit in a courtroom for a day and take a look at the differences between the kinds of people being accused of crimes generally and the people doing the accusing generally. If Foucault is right, then as technology makes more and more traditionally working class jobs obsolete, we would expect to see a rise in the prison population. And we have. Foucault says all that happens because the penal system isn't supposed to be just, or fair, or even prevent crime. It's supposed to make people useful to the ruling classes. He writes, prison, and no doubt punishment in general, is not intended to eliminate offences, but rather to distinguish them, to distribute them, to use them. That it is not so much that they render docile those who are liable to transgress the law, but that they tend to assimilate the transgression of the laws in a general tactics of subjection. So now you know Foucault's general thesis, that the penal system is a tool for defending the power of the ruling class. But save your comments and your questions for part 2, because you need to know how that works. You need to know the mechanism. In part 2, we'll be talking about government surveillance, prisons, and forced labour. If you enjoyed today's lesson, I have a tip jar at paypal.me/philosophytube. Think of it as me putting a hat round at the end of a lecture. And actually, if you could give a regular donation at patreon.com/philosophytube, that helps me give away free education to people all over the world. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.